Hello, I'm Casey Aiken, and this is 21 This Week. Coming up next, what the heck's an Uber? We're going to sit down with the owner of Barwood Cabs to discuss the phenomena of several new companies such as Uber, Lyft, and Sidecar, which have sprung up providing alternative driver-for-hire services. Then our panel will discuss what grade would you give MCPS for educating our kids? Would you give them a P for proficient? And why did gun manufacturer Beretta move its operations from Maryland to Tennessee? Stay tuned for our panel of insiders to give you the story behind the story. We're joined by former Majority Leader of the Maryland House of Delegates, John Hurson, Republican activist, Jerry Cave, former Maryland State Senator, Gene Roesser. Stay tuned for these stories and more on the next 21 This Week. And welcome back. What the heck's an Uber? In German, the term Uber means the ultimate. But around the Washington metropolitan area, it's fighting words. As 5 Maryland area cab companies and most recently 8 taxi and limousine companies in Northern Virginia have filed suit against the Gen X popular company called Uber, which in its internet advertising calls itself Ride Sharing, Taxi, and Taxi Alternative App. To put this issue into perspective, we're joined by Lee Barnes, owner of Montgomery County's largest fleet of taxi cabs. And for the record, I've known Lee for too many years that we both like to forget. And we're both graduates of Leadership Montgomery, class of 2000. Lee, the issue is more complex than why are all these companies so angry about an app that you can download on your smartphone. You can't ride an app, but you can use your smartphone to hire a private car for hire. What's the issue here?
The issue is it's new, it's different. But the issue for the industry is that this is an unregulated business. This is a business where our industry, the taxi industry, for a long time has operated under very stringent regulations. We have an entire book of regulations. Uber has a plain white sheet of paper. They have no regulations to operate under.
Well, that's a great question, Lee, because the livery business has been providing vehicles that people can hire as a long history. The City of London has regulated hackney carriage drivers since Oliver Cromwell presented legislation in 1654. Yet the popularity of companies such as Uber, Lyft, Sidecar has grown so explosively that GQ magazine wrote this recently: city by city, Uber is upending the taxi business, even though its rides can be pricier than cabs. So what's the hook? Instant gratification, a hint of glamour, some sex appeal. It's for people who want to feel like Jay-Z for a night. Is that it? Is it that simple? Is it all about perception?
No, it's not about perception. It's about a free market, and it's not a free market. It's absolutely not. Because you're dealing with an unregulated provider providing the exact same services the taxi industry is doing, but they're doing it completely unregulated, and it's not fair.
Well, Lee, what people say is, well, all we're doing is ride sharing. We're just making a simple phone call, and somebody picks us up, and we agree to a ride. What's wrong with that?
Well, it's not that simple, because it's no different than a taxi cab. What happens is that they set the price, they determine what the driver is, they have vehicles that are not inspected by the local and state government like the taxis are. Their fares are set by them, and it's not fair.
Well, it sounds like you're concerned about a level playing field. Well, the New York City Taxi and Limousine Commission, the agency responsible for licensing and regulating New York City's medallion taxi cabs and for hire vehicles, they regulate 50,000 vehicles and approximately 100,000 drivers. They shut down the operations of Lyft because it's not complied with safety requirements and the other licensing criteria. So we're getting back to the issue of public safety, but we're also getting back to the regulation of fares and regulations of drivers. Is that the issue?
Absolutely. It's absolutely a public safety and consumer protection issue. The industry that we are competing with, we can compete in the marketplace if it's a level playing field. And the issue on public safety, for instance, recently in D.C. a couple of weeks ago, there was a group of businessmen who were held hostage as an Uber driver went on a high-speed chase through the city, etc. in the city of San Francisco. Sadly, the death of a child by of an Uber driver, and Uber takes no responsibility. When you download their app, you waive any liability that you can have against them. So it's absolutely public safety and price gouging.
In the very profile of GQ magazine, where one of their writers masquerade as an Uber driver, he talked about very candidly about the fact that why would somebody get into a cab where they don't have any idea who the driver is, and more importantly, why would the driver pick up somebody who they have no idea where they're going and how to control it? For years, crime has been an issue. Is that one of the reasons your industry is a regulated industry?
Well, I think there's many reasons why our industry is a regulated industry. For instance, one of the reasons is public safety, as mentioned earlier. I think also because to protect both passenger and driver. But what you're talking about then is some neighborhoods then, certain zip codes, because today to ride in any one of the Uber-like services, you have to have a credit card, you have to have a smartphone, and you have to have the disposable income as the prices vary, and to be in the right neighborhood. We serve all of the areas of Montgomery County.
So are your drivers licensed?
Our drivers are licensed.
Do they have a criminal background check?
They have, better than a criminal background check, they have a fingerprint criminal background check. And that's significant because people can falsify identity, but not your fingerprints, as well as insurance requirements. You won't believe it, but 17 state insurance commissioners have issued warnings to consumers about riding in these car services because they don't have commercial insurance. You're left up to your own good luck if you have something happen.
Supporters of Uber say that the real attraction is convenience, that your industry hasn't kept up with the times. How do you respond to that?
Our industry does innovate, has been innovative, and under regulation we've been innovative. For instance, at our company, you can order the taxi on an app. We have, you can order it online, you can text us your order, you can call into our call center. So there's quite a bit of that, all under regulation, that we've been able to do that.
We got about 1 minute left in our segment. And earlier said that all you really wanted was a level playing field. What does a level playing field look like to you?
To us, what it looks like is that the state and local governments will enforce the current regulations that we operate under, because they enforce on us every day, and we respect that, and we've operated under that for years. So if the state and local governments will begin enforcement of the existing regulations, and our industry has been innovative, has picked up passengers, in our company's case, more than 50 years. And so we haven't,
We're gonna have to wrap this up. But earlier you talked to me and said about so that you were regulated by every jurisdiction in this area, every county, Prince George's, Montgomery, the district. So is it time for a complete overhaul of the regulations of your industry to an area-wide basis?
I do believe it is time. I believe that now the technology exists so that each jurisdiction could be assured of compliance to their own standards and to have some sort of a regional operating permit.
Lee, thank you for being here. You've shed a great light on what is an interesting topic. When we come back from this short break, our panel will comment on the ride-sharing issue, the changes in Montgomery County Public School grading systems, and why did gun manufacturer Beretta move its operations to Tennessee? Stay tuned. So welcome back. We're now joined by our panel. Panel, you heard the comments of Lee Barnes. What do you think of this issue of Uber cabs and apps and whether or not this should be a regulated industry? Why don't we start with Jerry on this?
Casey, this is one of the rare occasions when I do not have the definitive answer, so I'm going to talk around this a little bit. What's interesting is technology is very disruptive and destroys current business models, and it looks like it's going to do the same here. What's different are two things. Number one is this is a regulated industry. The internet has destroyed a lot of the advertising business, which is totally unregulated, and the second issue here is got a liability issue, as Mr. Barnes brought up. So I don't know how this is all going to sort out, but technology destroys old business models, sets up new ones. He is in a very tough spot because he is regulated, he has liability issues, and these other people do not. So it's going to be very interesting to see how it sorts out.
You know, Gene, one of the interesting things that Mr. Barnes brought up during our conversation and earlier was the fact that he has regulations from every jurisdiction in this industry. He can't pick up a rider in D.C. from Montgomery County unless the cab is specially sent into D.C. for the pickup. So is this a fair way of treating businesses?
I was shocked to hear that they were so restrictive in these cross-jurisdictional areas. And I think that your last comment and Lee Barnes' last comment, that there needs to be a regional pact among the Washington metropolitan area where there's more flexibility for cabs in DC or Prince George's or Montgomery. It doesn't make sense for a cab driver to drive me to the Kennedy Center and not be able to get a pickup to go back to Montgomery County. That's a loser.
But John, doesn't that just sort of reinforces the idea that government regulations sometimes can be too restrictive, and now that we have newer technologies, we can solve some of the safety issues, but also deregulate the industry?
Well, you have a balance here that you have to achieve, and I'm sort of surprised. I'm in agreement with Jerry here. I mean, basically technology is changing this industry as it's changed lots of industries. Newspaper industry, I mean, that's gone the way of the dodo. I mean, there are lots of things that are being changed by technology, and this industry needs to adapt. But government needs to adapt as well. I mean, you have to change the regulatory framework. I agree with Gene that you need a more regional framework on taxi cabs and transportation. So this is a changing world. I appreciate where Mr. Barnes is, but it's got to change, and we have to do that.
You know, what was interesting was the same week that New York City blocked the use of Lyft cabs or the Lyft service, the city of Seoul, Korea also imposed restrictions on Uber. This is an international issue because the livery industry has been regulated for centuries everywhere. So
one of the experiences I got out of Annapolis is there's turf wars, okay? There always are turf wars in the business community. And this is a turf war. I mean, you've got a new basic service that's being provided there, and they're going to battle it out, and it's got to get done.
Well, the last question that I asked Lee Barnes is, what would a level playing field look like? We're going to have to wait and see as these turf wars get fought in all of these different jurisdictions. Now let's take a look here in Montgomery County, because education fads, they come and go. It wasn't so long ago, well, maybe it was when I was in school in the 70s, that pass-fail was thought to be the way to grade student performance. Then the reality of how to separate the achievers from the slackers led schools back to the measured grading system. So why now is Montgomery County Public School System proposing to revert to the grading as proficient and non-proficient? We'll start with, who did I say we're going to start with? You, John. I'm sorry.
Here's my take on this. First of all, I want to say, look, we've got a great school system in Montgomery County. I mean, it's one of the best in the state of Maryland. People move here to get their kids into our school system. We've got great teachers. That said, what's going on here? I mean, I understand they need to try new things. They have that core curriculum and all that stuff going on. But honestly, you need to have something more than a P or a no P. I mean, I mean, A, B, C, D, E, F, or whatever. You knew where your kids were. And my kids went to public school system. I don't agree with this kind of system unless there's a communication from the departments, from the education community about why this makes sense. And I don't think they've communicated it well at all.
Jerry.
It's a lack of accountability. You can't be doing that. You got to tell students where they are. It's funny, when I went to Catholic school, they gave you satisfactory, improvement needed, and unsatisfactory.
Right.
And I always got improvement needed in penmanship and deportment, which I'm sure is no surprise to you. But I do want to differ with Brother Hurson on this issue. Everybody says, oh, Montgomery County schools are so great. They're pretty good, but the issue is when you have a well-educated, white-collar group of people who are very intelligent, they tend to have kids that are the same. And that skews our results in education and how they perform. So I'm not sure that Montgomery County schools are quite as good as everybody thinks they are, and quite as good as they should be for the money we put into them.
Well, I think that you've actually struck a nerve here, Jerry, and not the fact that I spent most of fourth grade in the hallway being disciplined. The real issue is accountability, and whether or not our schools are providing the type of education that we expect. I think parents should demand the accountability from the schools, and I don't think this pass, fail, or proficient, non-proficient really gives the parents enough involvement. I think the thing that lacks in most public schools, particularly in the poorer schools, is parental involvement. The parents aren't pushing for better education, and I think that's what's really wrong here. You don't get the feedback.
I really think it's the tool that parents are looking for. They need a tool to know how to interact with the system, and a report card is the tool. So if the report card doesn't mean anything to them, then how do they interact? I totally agree with you.
We've got a hyper competitive. Some schools are hyper competitive. You know, the AP classes and the honors classes and all of that. I can't imagine those parents are going to be happy with a pass, fail, or proficient, non-proficient system.
I wouldn't be happy with it.
I can't help but feel that sometimes folks, they've done this core curriculum, and they say, now what do we do? They're always looking for something to do, and I think this is just, I don't think it really has meaning. It's just an add-on.
You know, I mean, last week we discussed the fact that test scores in math and in English were failing for the third or fourth year in a row for middle school and elementary school children. And the issue is, you can say the test that they took wasn't fair, but if they can't read, they can't write, and they can't learn their mathematics, we're not functioning right as a school system. It's not just the test. Jerry, you're going to have to hold it because we got one more topic and we got very little time, and so we're going to go. We'll get to you in September, Jerry. All right. When the Maryland General Assembly began its debate last year to enforce new and more stringent gun laws, the Italian gun manufacturer Beretta, which had its plant in Prince George's County, testified that it would have difficulty maintaining its manufacturing facility in a state where it was illegal to sell most of their products. Now, this past week, Beretta announced that it was closing that plant in Prince George's County, terminating 160 people. 160 jobs are leaving again. And it's going to move its operations to Tennessee. Gene, is this a fair thing to do? And is this just another message that Maryland is not friendly to business?
There's one thing that I learned in the legislature, to quote you, John, and that is that every law that passes has consequences, intended and unintended. And I don't know if this move by Beretta is one or the other, but that is what happens when the legislature passes, meritorious or not, legislation that affects industries or has the potential to affect business. They will move out of the state, and this is what is happening to Beretta. They've been in here over 40 years, and they're pulling up stakes and moving to Tennessee, and as a result of this legislation or what they see down the road, because each piece of legislation, it isn't an end in itself. It usually brings about more legislation.
Well, so, as I said in the opening read, John, some of the consequences were forecast. Now, if I recall, you were in favor of the gun legislation that was passed. So, is this a fair consequence? And it really has 160 jobs in the scheme of things aren't that great, but is this a good trade-off for that legislation?
I totally agree with what you just said. I think this was very predictable in terms of the results. I don't think it's a major impact on the economy. Beretta needs to make their business decisions in an appropriate way. They've made it. I don't think it's, I mean, Maryland has a dynamic economy. I mean, it is growing, and I don't think we should, take a decision about 160 jobs and change what we believe is the right public policy, and that's what we decided.
But wouldn't we get excited if 160 new jobs were coming to Maryland?
I think 160 new jobs come to Maryland every day, and we should be excited about it every day. And I just honestly don't believe that we should actually make a decision about what we think is the right public policy based on 160 jobs.
Jerry.
I didn't spend much time or any time in the legislature, thanks to the good citizens of this county, but I spent it in business. So let me tell you how people make decisions in business. They make them emotionally and justify them logically. There is so much information of businesses that have left this state. The only thing this state is benefiting from is its proximity to Washington, D.C. and the federal government. But they've insulted gun owners, gun manufacturers. They insulted Beretta with this bill and laid the groundwork for more onerous. Beretta is making military weapons for our military people primarily, and they as much as said, we don't want you in the state, get out. It's a bad message, but it's consistent with what Maryland's all about, which is stripping our citizens of the Second Amendment, getting non-businesses that have nothing to do, getting businesses out that have nothing to do with federal government. They left their headquarters here because they still have to lobby and talk to the federal government. But the blue-collar jobs, and not everybody is suited for white-collar jobs, guys. Some people are suited for blue-collar, and Maryland's letting those all go.
Well,
driving them out is what they're doing.
But it really gets back to the fact that the people who have elected the Maryland General Assembly, both in the House of Delegates and the Senate, their representatives decided a policy issue here, and whether we like it or not, that the policy was to enforce stricter gun laws.
Yeah, and it has a negative impact, which I've pointed out on this show many times, and I won't berate you again. Well, I will. Virginia has less gun laws and less murder rate, and Maryland has stricter gun laws and stricter gun rates, and now we got 160 less jobs.
You know what, Jerry? You have the last word for the show before we take our summer break. When we come back from this short break, parting shots. And welcome back now with parting shots, Jerry Cave.
I'm going to follow up on what I just said, and it's a bit of a stretch. Terrible problem in the Ukraine. It's not President Obama's fault. He's not helping much, but it's not his fault. The problem in the Ukraine is the responsibility of the people in the Ukraine. When they made a very foolish decision to give up their nuclear weapons, their ability to defend themselves, and count on their territorial integrity to be maintained by other countries, that was the mistake they made, and they're paying for that now. It's a far more complicated issue, and I'd love to talk about it, but it's a good lesson for people in Maryland. When you strip citizens of their Second Amendment rights, they lose their ability to protect themselves. That's a big issue, and it applies on the micro level too.
Thank you, Jerry. John Hurson, your parting shot.
I want to shout out to the people who are in this county trying to help out in the war in the Middle East. The Gazette did a great article this week about Robert Katz, who's a firefighter who's gone over to Israel and is standing in during the war to take care of Israel, during the time when their fighters are actually in Gaza. Those firefighters are moving out, and then the churches in the Montgomery County area who are trying to fund hospitals in Gaza and trying to help out. So, we think these things are far away from us, but they're not far away from us, and we need to help. And a shout out to the Gazette for highlighting it, and to the people who are actually doing it. So that's my.
Thank you, John. Gene Roesser, your parting shot.
In June, the Washington Post ran a story about the primary election and the candidates. And at the very end of the story, Lieutenant Governor Brown was quoted as saying that he would take this hill, meaning the primary, he would win the primary election, and then go on to take the tiny molehill. And that has still stuck with me. And it's just an example of why 125,000 Republicans in Montgomery County, plus sympathetic Democrats and independents, must turn out for the general election and vote. We must show them that we are not a minor molehill.
Thank you, Jean, and thank you, panel. This was great. We had some great topics tonight. I want to thank the viewers for joining us, and we'll be back with new hard-hitting discussions in September. But in the meantime, you can follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, and you can re-watch Jerry on YouTube as much as your little heart desires. For 21 this week, I'm Casey Aiken.